So, I have a problem. You see, there's this one game that I can't stop playing. A game that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, have found few to no other videos discussing it, but every time I try to make one myself, I just can't. You see, the problem is, how do I make a video about a game that looks like this, sounds like this, yet is somehow responsible for some of the best gaming experiences I've had in 2024. This is Space Station 14. Well, technically, this is Rouny's Marine Corps, a server within Space Station 14. But for all intents and purposes, it might as well be its own standalone game. You see, Space Station 14 is entirely open source. This means that not only can players create and maintain their own servers, but these servers are actually the backbone of the entire game. While the base version of Space Station 14 is enjoyable in its own right, players have taken it to the next level, changing nearly every aspect of the game to craft wildly unique experiences. And that's where RMC, Rouny's Marine Corps, comes in. This server doesn't just tweak the base game, it transforms it into something completely different. And here's where my problem lies. Out of all my time playing Space Station 14, a game I've only owned for a little over a month. I know, that's a lot of hours. Like I said, it's addicting. More than 99% of my time in Space Station 14 has been spent on this one server. And while the base game of Space Station 14 is already a challenge to explain, summarizing the sheer depth of Rouny's Marine Corps feels almost impossible. But I'm gonna give it a shot. At its core, RMC is a top-down military role-playing game with a hefty dose of shooter mechanics, character abilities, and playstyle customization. It's also one of the most chaotically rewarding and downright addictive games I have ever played. The game itself revolves around two rival factions, the Marines and an alien species known as Xenos. Think Xenomorphs from the Alien franchise, not the Warhammer 40k Xenos. Each of these factions offers a vastly different playstyle, so much so that it sometimes feels like you're playing two entirely separate games. The objective of the game is simple. For the Marines, land on the planet and eliminate the Xenos. For the Xenos, defend your hive, repel the Marines, and invade their space station to slaughter as many of them as possible. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, in execution, it's anything but, especially for the Marines. Marine gameplay is intricate, with over 25 jobs to choose from, a rigid command hierarchy, fully customizable loadouts, and restricted communication channels. In this environment, coordinating a successful mission feels like playing a round of Xeno with your eyes squinted. And as you might have guessed from the sheer number of jobs, Marine gameplay varies widely from your choice of profession. But for this video, we will focus on what it all centers around, that being the battle on the planet below. A typical round for any Marines deploying planetside involves 4 phases, if everything goes well. First, you gear up, grabbing and customizing your loadout, hopping in requisition lines staffed by players, and getting briefed by the executive or commanding officer of the operation. Now is a good time to mention that there are no NPCs in this game. Every person you see, from pilot to quartermaster to doctor to officer to military police, or even the engineers keeping the station running, are all being controlled by real players. And each round typically has over 150 of these players, sometimes even going above the 250 or even 300 mark. It's this sense of community, this large network of individuals that are working together as a unit, that really brings life and excitement to RMC. The knowledge that everyone's role is important, and that even an individual will most certainly affect the outcome of a 100-man battle. Now, after you've geared up and received your orders for the round, Marines then deploy planetside and group up with the respective squads, which are signified by the color of armor worn. Are you still with me? Good, because this is where things start to get a little bit more complex. Remember when I mentioned the restricted communication channels found in Rouny's Marine Corps? Well, I'm going to explain a bit more of what I meant. You see, in RMC, there is no voice chat. Everything is typed, usually in a local channel where only those around you can hear. But there are many more channels that Marines and others on their side have access to, such as a text channel for just your squad, a text channel for those in command, or a channel specifically for requesting air and mortar strikes. Yes, these are things in the game that we will touch on later. The reason I bring up these text channels is because to the Marines, they're everything. You see, once the Marines have deployed planetside, these forms of communications are, well, useless. That is, at least until the communications tower on the planet can be fixed. Until that happens though, Marines are restricted to very few forms of communication. They can of course still talk locally, but they can also receive mass orders from command, either through text chat or through updates on their map. Lastly, if a Marine has a phone backpack equipped, they can phone any other Marine or area that also has a phone. Whew, I told you it was gonna get complicated. But with the way communication works in Rouny's Marine Corps, information and communication are everything. And their understanding is essential to understanding the difficulties and complexities RMC has to offer. With that explained, we can move forward to the next phase of Marine combat. Once the Marines have repaired the comms tower and all those text channels I talked about become available, the fight for land begins. Marines must push through hordes of Xenos, which, remember, are real players with their own goals and abilities. The Marines' main objective in all of this fighting is to locate and eliminate the Xeno's queen, which is the leader of the Xeno army, and comes with her own super powerful abilities, that we will get to later. But to put it super simply, if you kill the queen, the whole game gets much easier for the Marines. Once the queen is defeated, the Marines will typically fan out in search of the Xeno nest, and kill any stragglers along the way. When all Xenos are dead, the round is over with the Marines having achieved their victory. Now, let's take a break here, because I know I've been talking a lot. But what I just explained is, in my mind, the simplest, most straightforward way to explain a typical round of Rouny's Marine Corps. But of course, as I've said many times throughout the course of this video, this game is way more complex than I could ever do the justice of covering. So, to make up for everything I missed, here's a rapid-fire showcase of all the abilities and features from the Marine side of things that I just couldn't fit in, but want to mention. Barricades. Specific Marines, known as Comtechs or CTs for short, are in charge of fixing and repairing mechanisms groundside, but their main responsibility is building barricades, often called cades for short. These cades allow Marines to gain ground and prevent Xeno flanks, but they require metal or steel in order to build. Mortars. Mortar shells can be fired on locations when coordinates are given. The mortar is manned by a player, and the coordinates for where the shell will land must be relayed by another player using a rangefinder. Airstrikes. Besides the red flares that Marines use for lighting up an area, green flares can be used to call in air support from players manning the gunship. Orbital bombardments. Orbital bombardments are huge explosions, capable of wiping out entire areas of the map. The Marines start with 3 of these, and they do require cords before firing. Just make sure that if you are the one calling in an orbital bombardment, that you get the correct cords, or you might inadvertently be doing the Xenos a huge favor. Now that we've covered the basics of Marine gameplay, let's look at their enemies, the Xenos. Xeno gameplay is much more straightforward and less complex than the Marine side of things. That isn't to say that it isn't fun though. In fact, its gameplay offers some of the most intensely exciting moments RMC has to offer, even if its features are much easier to understand. See, for one thing, Xenos don't suffer from the communication issues that Marines do. They can communicate through a hive mind, meaning every Xeno can talk to every other Xeno, making their communication unrestricted and allowing for information to flow freely across the battlefield. For another, instead of picking a job or a role to play as a Xeno, there is an evolution tree that players will slowly climb and maneuver through as they gain evolution points. There are many different types of Xenos that a player can become, but this evolution tree makes their abilities quickly and easily understandable. A typical round from a Xeno perspective involves spending the early phase of a round building up a queen's nest. As the longer a queen is able to stay still, the more evolution points players will earn and the stronger the Xeno army will become. This nest building is done by building walls in maze-like patterns throughout the hive, spreading weeds across the map, which is this black sludge that slows Marines' movement, along with giving Xenos many advantages when they fight on it. Once the Marines have arrived planetside, the Xeno's job is to wipe them all out, capturing as many as possible, as each captured Marine can be infected with a parasite that will grow into a larva before bursting out of a Marine's chest, permanently killing said Marine and adding one new member to the Xeno army. This capturing feature is the basis of Xeno gameplay. Protect the Queen, capture Marines to grow your army, and push the Marines' army back. If the Xenos can successfully force the Marines to retreat, they will then have the opportunity to board the Marine space station and kill as many as they can before the Marines can escape. Once all the Marines on the space station are dead, the round is over and the Xenos rejoice. Now, while that is the general gist of the game, Marines kill Xenos, Xenos kill Marines, I must say that RMC is much more in depth than almost any game I've ever played. There are Xenos that specialize in capturing lone Marines. There are Marines that can wield weapons of great power and destruction, and so much more. I didn't even get a touch on the command room, which is an essential part to Marine gameplay. Rouny's Marine Corps is constantly receiving updates, with another huge one dropping while I was working on this video, that added Molotovs, new evolutions for the Xenos, and many other improvements to the game. So if there was any time to try this game out, it's now. Oh, and now might be a good time to mention that Space Station 14 is free, and Rouny's Marine Corps is typically the most populated server, so it's really easy to play and find. I love RMC not just for its fun, addictive playstyle, but for its community. Even though there are hundreds of players populating the servers, you will often find familiar faces, players that are renowned for their skill, and others that are just great to be around. If you even think for a second that you might enjoy this game, give it a shot. If you find yourself lost and overwhelmed, just ask for help. Everyone is super friendly and always ready to give advice. One of my main motivations for making this video was so that I could stream me playing this game in the near future. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider joining our Discord. It's a great place to see when I am streaming or even when I upload videos. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, consider leaving a like or even subscribing. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next week.